In this situation, Roosevelt attracted especially the people in the lower 80% of family income brackets to the fact that he was going to do something for them. And we had a deeper cultural level in the United States, which is not British. People had an idea of a constitution, may not have been too clear on it, but they knew under our system that's not right. We don't do that to our own people. We don't let them starve. We don't let them suffer. It's not our way of doing things. So he could appeal to that sense of justice, of fairness, or sometimes called fairness, in the American population. And he got a tremendous base of support in it. He knew what he was doing. He knew the history. He'd laid the basis for what he did in his governorship in New York. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what he was up against. He knew who the enemy was. And he knew that we were not safe unless we got rid of the British system.
This was the Franklin Roosevelt after earning a majority of the popular support during the primaries that came into the Democratic Party convention of 1932. A nomination of Roosevelt would mean the revival of Lincoln's legacy. A victory of anyone else would ensure an end of the United States.
Roosevelt came into the convention as the clear favorite of the American people, yet the party apparatus was dead set against Roosevelt getting the nomination.
Amidst the chaos of the convention, the Roosevelt apparatus persisted. Cracks started to develop among the different constituencies, and ultimately an American response came from the participants of the convention. Enough people realized that Roosevelt was the only alternative to the Wall Street Party, and that he was the only one committed and prepared to govern in the interests of the United States. A deal was brokered. The California and Texas delegations broke for Roosevelt, and he secured the nomination.
Franklin D. Roosevelt, having received more than 2/3 of all the delegates voting, I proclaim him the nominee of this convention for President of the United States.
Although this pleased the people in the convention, it did not please Raskob and his masters.
It seems unbelievable that the Democratic Party, born and bred in the fine old aristocracy of the South, and always fostered and nourished by a conservative people, such as Smith, P.S. DuPont, and myself, is now turned over to a radical group such as Roosevelt's.
Hearing of his nomination, Roosevelt broke tradition, took a major risk at the time, and flew an airplane to Chicago in order to address the people of the convention directly and to draw the battle lines of his campaign.
There are two ways of viewing the government's duty in matters affecting economic and social life. One is to see to it that a favored few are helped, and hopes that some of their prosperity will leak through, sift through to labor, to the farmer, to the small business man. That theory belongs to the party of Toryism, and I had hoped that most of the Tories left this country in 1776. Our Republican leaders tell us economic laws, sacred, inviolable, unchangeable, cause panics which no one could prevent. But while they prate of economic laws, men and women are starving. We must lay hold of the fact that economic laws are not made by nature. They are made by human beings.
The power that parties get is significant. It's significant as a factor on the scene. But what's decisive is the leadership, which is always centered in one or two or more individual minds who are actually driving history in that direction with ideas, as Roosevelt did, with ideas.
By the election in November of 1932, Roosevelt won and was ready to begin his New Deal for the nation.
It looked, my friends, like a real landslide this time.
In Florida, 2 weeks before Roosevelt's inauguration, an anarchist emerged from the crowd and fired 5 shots at Roosevelt. The bullets intended for Roosevelt did not hit their mark, but undoubtedly Roosevelt knew, much like President-elect Lincoln before him knew, who his enemies were. On March 4th, 1933, Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated as the 31st President of the United States.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance. Yes, the money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. We may now restore that temple to the ancient truths.
So between Lincoln and Roosevelt, we didn't have an American president who was able to fundamentally transform the United States with this idea of the American system. Roosevelt understood this. He understood it from his studies of Hamilton. I'm sure he also understood Lincoln's policy very clearly, because so much of what he did was an echo of Lincoln.
Within hours of his first day in office, Roosevelt began a comprehensive reorganization of the nation's economy. Illustrative is the case of Chief Aide Harry Hopkins, who, armed with only a card table, a pot of coffee, and a telephone, hired 11 million Americans and spent $20 million in the first 3 hours of the administration. With the Civilian Conservation Corps, Rural Electrification Administration, the Four Corners Projects, and others, Roosevelt launched the largest peacetime mobilization of manpower and materials the world had ever seen. As an incredible example, the Tennessee Valley Authority transformed one of the most backward areas of the nation into an industrial powerhouse.
This was the plan: to chain the river through a series of giant dams, checking the flood, to open it to navigation from its mouth to its headwaters. To give the farmers the benefit of modern science and research, to help them control the water on their land and restore the fertility of the soil, to reforest millions of acres on the ravaged hillsides, to exploit the mineral resources of the area, to use the electric power generated by the dams to develop and rehabilitate industry in the cities, to electrify the farms through rural cooperatives. Above all, to prove that human problems can be solved by reason, science, and education.
Roosevelt used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation as a quasi-national bank to reestablish the credit of the nation. He built schools, libraries, airports, post offices, and all with government-issued credit. He reestablished the U.S. currency, stabilized the price of gold, and opened a penetrating investigation into the rampant speculation on Wall Street, all within the first 100 days of his administration.
But what he wanted to do was move immediately to stop the foreclosures, put people back in their homes, save the farms, build back farm income, and start up U.S. industry again. And to a large extent, he succeeded.
Policies that Roosevelt instituted for rebuilding the U.S. economy completely flew in the face of these powerful Wall Street and City of London allied interests.
By the middle of 1933, Roosevelt's attacks against free trade practices were tearing up the privatized control of the U.S. economy. As a desperate reaction to Roosevelt and his American system policies, one of the most outlandish British-directed plots in modern history was planned. J.P. Morgan's John Raskob was tasked to form a group to propagandize against Roosevelt's policies. This organization, becoming active in most cities and states, fervently attacked Roosevelt with thousands of speeches and millions of pamphlets distributed across the nation. The group was called the American Liberty League.